Libertarianism is pro-immigration, pro-market, pro-trade.
More competitive, less centralized. Not military confrontations, but peaceful interaction.
The war on drugs has been actually an unmitigated disaster.
Fortunately, by and large, I think most people don't do that. 5, we're very ignorant. We might know a little bit about policy, or you might know a lot about what you're pursuing your degree in, but I have no idea how to run an auto shop, or how to work a computer, or how many mines there should be in the United States. I'm very, very ignorant about most of the world. 6, non-government institutions really matter, whether they're religious institutions, sport organizations, charities like Alcoholics Anonymous, the press, higher education, these are valuable. And finally, maybe the biggest one, politicians are people too. They are not special. I have lived in DC since January 2012, and it is Veep, not the West Wing. That is the most accurate portrayal of how that city works. And because politicians are people, they are ignorant, self-interested, have subjective values, and I think that's worth taking into consideration. So given all that, those facts actually lead me to the conclusion that we should have a government that is not very involved in our personal lives and in our economy. But it should protect freedom, markets, it should adhere to the rule of law, and it should minimize coercion. Remember that all rules and regulations have at the end the threat of violence and force. And I know this is a stereotypical flippant thing for a libertarian to say, but I think it is a crucial political problem that more people should take seriously. So to sum up, I will go through a few policies that I think are fair to say adhere to libertarianism. Libertarianism is pro-immigration, pro-market, pro-trade, pro-school choice, pro-free press, pro-freedom of religion. It's pro-drug legalization, pro-legalization of prostitution. But it's anti-corporatism, it's anti-subsidy, anti-protectionism, anti-trade wars, and anti-military wars most of the time. That, I think, is a fair summation of libertarianism. I feel like I do have some time to tease out the motions, but I won't if I'm at the minute mark. Well, I'll come in on time and under budget.
Thank you. All right, now we'll start the prompt part of the debate, which will have a prompt question, and we'll proceed with each speaker having 3 minutes to address the prompt, followed by 2 minutes each to rebut any points that were made by the other speakers. So again, we'll start with the order for the first prompt with David, and moving on, and then we'll start with Ryan for the second one, and then Matthew for the third one. All right. So our first prompt. Beyond not harming others, are there any limits on what individuals should be permitted to do? All right, David?
The short answer is no. Actions that are wholly self-contained, i.e. actions that do not reverberate across space and time to harm others, cannot be forbidden in a free society. This is America, and each and every one of us is absolutely free to do whatever the hell it is we want to do, so long, of course, as we do not harm others. Now, here's the rub. Everything hinges on how you define harming others. Our libertarian friends are going to define it in the narrowest possible terms, i.e. physically aggressing someone or directly causing them harm without their consent. Our liberal friends, on the other hand, have a tendency to define it in overbroad terms. For example, they think that so-called hate speech should be criminalized because it's offensive and it hurts people. As a conservative, I take the middle position. And I define harming others not according to a precise mathematical formula, but by looking at any particular individual action and asking myself a simple question. How likely is it that this behavior is going to spread across society and undermine the common good? If this is permitted, will more and more people do it? And may it reach a point where it begins to threaten what the Constitution calls domestic tranquility, and our ability to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Let's take the easiest and most obvious example, drugs. Should you be permitted to smoke a doobie in your dorm room? Should you be permitted to go out into the woods, pop some shrooms, and commune with Mother Nature? It's a free country, our libertarians friends will say, and we're all adults capable of making our own decisions. But what happens, I ask, when more and more of our fellow Americans get addicted? What happens when you start to think through the effects of drug addiction on communities and the country as a whole? The broken homes, the parents who neglect and abandon their children, the rampant crime, the ruined lives, the devastation. Do individual actions have no ripple effect? Is each man a self-contained island? Are we not embedded as individuals into various communities? As a conservative, when I think of harm, I don't merely look at a snapshot of an individual action. Here's the meth, give me the money. What I do is I press play and I zoom out. And I ask myself, over time and across the country, is this sustainable? And if it isn't, and it most definitely isn't in the case of hard drugs, then I turn my attention to the very hard question of figuring out, well, what should we do about it? And I'll end in closing by saying that you can oppose the legalization of hard drugs, as I do, without, however, mindlessly defending every single current policy in the war on drugs. Thank you.
Right.
So no surprise here. I would say yes, but it depends. I think David's absolutely right to start off with the question of how do we actually define harm, because that is really what the linchpin of this conversation is. I would say progressives don't necessarily over-define it in a very broad sense, but I think what I would like to kind of look at it is I see it as a cost to society. Harm can be physical, yes, but it can also be intellectual. It can be a lot of different things, but I think ultimately the best word that encapsulates it is cost. This is a cost to our society. If that is the case, then I would agree that we do need to stop costs from rising. We have major problems with that across the board. We should stop that, but I also believe the other aspect is, and this is where I really do like to say that this is a yes, but with a caveat, is I do believe we have a responsibility as American citizens to make sure that we are paying stuff forward. Take example for taxes. I know the three of us up here have drastically different views on how we should tax people, at what rates we should be taxing folks. I think it is a far less tenable position to argue over the complete abolition of tax, because we as Americans have a responsibility as a society, as a community, to make sure that we are paying for the goods that we have. We take advantage of roads, we take advantage of education systems, we take advantage of mass aspects of communal resources. I think our climate change, we can certainly get into the climate change debate, but climate is one of these aspects that I think we have significant costs that we are not assuming so far. Because of this, I think we have a responsibility to pay forward, and I think the government in general can be a tool to make sure we're doing that. We also, I think, in that same sense, have a responsibility to make sure that we are protecting those that either are voiceless or cannot defend themselves. This is why, when you look throughout history, we've had significant instances of abuse and harm being used, and the system itself can be used to stop those things from happening. I know we'll have lots of conversations on specific aspects of regulations, but this is where regulations come into effect. They are there. We demand that we have police forces and firefighters and first responders to make sure that our communities are safe. Regulators, in some aspects, are doing the exact same thing, whether it is in the SEC, making sure that we're not seeing insider trading, or that we are fighting tax fraud through the IRS, among other things. So yes, there are limits in what individuals should be able to do, because one, they do inspire costs on others, and two, we have a responsibility of making sure that we're covering our own.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So, yeah, it depends. The language here is very interesting. I would note that the motion doesn't mention the word government at all. It says, beyond not harming others, are there any limits on what individuals should be permitted to do? So if by harm we mean physical violence and fraud, and by permitted we mean legally permitted, then there's, I suppose, not that much to debate. But I'm of the position that activities that harm yourself and harm others are and must be legal. It's absolutely essential. You should not cheat on your spouse. You should keep your promises to your friends. You shouldn't feed your children too much junk food. And you shouldn't watch too much TV. You shouldn't smoke too much. You shouldn't drink too much. But I want all those activities to be legal. I don't view the government as a great moral arbiter, and I don't believe that if people cheat on their spouse or eat too much junk food, that the state is the tool that we should reach to in order to solve problems. I'm not pretending that if we legalize all drugs that we wouldn't have problems. We would have problems. Some people would hurt themselves and others. That's absolutely true. But I think David made a very good argument for the prohibition of alcohol, which is easily one of the most deadly drugs around that does ruin lives and does cause a little bit of, or some portion of crime. Only look at drunk driving and assaults. Smoking is harmful, but we allow it. And I think that we should keep in mind that the barrier for government entry into our lives should be very, very high. We have a lot of non-government institutions, charities, churches, things like that are, turns out, much better positioned to help people who have problems when they harm themselves or others. When we look at the Venn diagram of activities that are illegal and activities that are harmful, there's actually very little overlap. We might be able to agree on murder and assault and a few other things, but there are plenty of harmful activities that are legal, and that, by the way, there are a lot of illegal activities that are relatively harmless, although not without harm. I'll point out that when we have morals, we shouldn't look to the government. I'm sure there might be people in the room who view the Ten Commandments as a great moral guide, and I may count myself among them. But I'm very thankful that we live in a country where if we try to implement them into law, 7 of the 10 commandments are unconstitutional. We don't view the government as necessarily a moral arbiter, and I think that's a good thing.
Thank you. Now we'll return to David. We have 2 minutes each for a rebuttal for any of the points raised.
Well, you said that in America we shouldn't smoke too much. I think you haven't been here long enough and you still have your British ways. In America, you're allowed to do a hell of a lot of things, but smoking is most emphatically not one of them. So Americans are unbelievably intolerant of smoking, especially in the big cities. I don't know how it is down here in Florida. You raised the point of prohibition. I think it should have been addressed to Ryan. It's the progressives who banned alcohol, not the conservatives at the turn of the century. Although I will readily concede, if it got completely out of control and it threatened the continued existence of the United States of America, I wouldn't rule it out. I wouldn't want it imposed by judicial fiat. I wouldn't want a president to wake up one morning and say, okay, executive order. But why would we prima facie say it is fundamentally inconceivable to think of a set of circumstances under which rampant, widespread alcoholism, with babies being born deformed because their mothers were drinking themselves into a stupor while they were pregnant, why couldn't this be elevated to a common political concern that may be legislated? I'd prefer we not get there. I am very much on the libertarian side of things in terms of being suspicious of government involvement, being well aware of the endless problems of regulatory capture, of special interest captures. You can have the best of intentions in the world. You come to Washington, D.C., they come out of the woodworks to embed into your laws their carve-outs and their demands. That said, I don't see why, as a principle, which is what we're discussing here tonight, not particular policies. So to be clear, you don't go back saying there was a crazy guy with a funny accent from the Heritage Foundation who wants to ban booze. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying I can perfectly imagine a set of conditions under which, yes, I would consider banning alcohol in America if it threatened the continued existence of the country. And I think you'd have to be crazy to say that in the name of liberty, you'd rather America disappear than ban a particular substance.
Thank you.
Right. So to respond to David's point, I think you're picking winners and losers when you're talking about the drug versus alcohol. In essence, what you're saying is that we have a specific belief on the fact that some of these substances are going to be harmful for individuals. That is true, but we're going to make sure that we're making one illegal while others that may or may not be more harmful continue to go out there because there are social and there are social and economic interests in making sure that those stay there. By doing so, you're invalidating the entire ideology that you guys stand behind. To Matthew's point, I do believe that there is actually a government does have a means to create